Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Cleantech, a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, June 21st, 2024. It's officially summer. Mike Casey, I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Engel. We'll have Jeff Young from Newsweek joining us shortly. Mike, hello. I was just complimenting you on your nice little summer tan, and I'm very, very impressed. You must have been out at some lacrosse matches the last few weeks.
Let me tell our viewers and listeners something. What they don't see is that John Engel comes with a joke and he springs it right before we begin taping.
I think we keep that in, even though you don't get the whole joke. I like to put Mike on his heels right off the bat, just so that he's uncomfortable throughout this episode. What's up with you?
I got 3 pieces of news for you.
Okay.
The first is this is episode 40.
Who's counting?
Me. That's cool.
Good.
All right.
That is good.
Number 2. Listener Peter Taylor told me that we cracked him up when he was listening to us as he was weeding his garden. So we were making him laugh. Just so you know.
That's nice. When I was roasting, I can't even remember what someone was mad at us for. Oh, it was talking too fast. Maybe it was during that section.
They weren't mad. It was a piece of constructive feedback. Stop being so defensive.
Okay. All right. Hey, Mike, a lot of things going on. So next week, we have our Grid Tech Connect Forum California event starting on Monday in Newport Beach. So episode description, you'll see a link to that, and you can catch Mike's good friend, Nextracker co-founder and CEO, Dan Sugar, giving a keynote address. So we're really excited for that. And thank you, Mike, for helping put that together. How's I see a note in my script that something happened with your Honda Element. Do tell.
Well, so that was the third piece of news. I wanted you to know that after 239,000 miles in 22 years, I drove it till literally the wheel came off on the highway. Like literally the driver's side wheel came off. And I made it over to the berm. No one was hurt, but you'll be happy to know, my materialistic friend, that I now have to get a new car.
I wish it would have had enough juice to get you to the dump, because that's where the Honda Element belongs. Okay.
All right. Would you
yeah.
please get going on this show? I try to
give
you nice news, and here you go. All right.
We need to get this going. So we want to thank our listeners for sharing their feedback and their nominations for Cleantecher of the Week. You can do that by emailing us at rew@clarionevents.com. Okay, Mike, number 1.
We have a story by David Fickling at Bloomberg titled "Solar Power Giants Are Providing More Energy Than Big Oil." Man, do I love that headline.
Yeah, it's an interesting story and probably only one that Bloomberg would write. So I'm glad they did. In the middle of the 20th century, the predecessors of the major international companies like Exxon and Shell were nicknamed the Seven Sisters because they dominated global energy production. Now, 7 Chinese solar companies, including LONGi, Trina, and Jinko, provide a larger portion of energy to the global population in the 21st century than the Seven Sisters did in the 20th. Analysts measured the output of polysilicon raw material produced and converted into gigawatts of energy. They found that the amount of useful energy that these oil companies provide to the world economy every year is less than the amount of energy that will be produced by the solar panels these 7 Chinese manufacturers are making every year. Mike.
All right, I'm going to read that headline one more time because I love it so much. Solar power giants are providing more energy than big oil. So solar is taking over the energy system because it's just a better technology. This is great news. But the real challenge is to get off fossil fuels even faster because we're cooking this planet. And we need to go from solar as an addition to solar as a replacement. In that respect, scaling EVs and electrification of the industry will be crucial. I'll close with this thought. This development leaves me pondering a not trivial question. How many times do LinkedIn's legions of fossil fuel bros need to be smacked upside the head by reality until they gave up their ideology over reality approach? We will only find out in the future. Story number 2, John.
Yeah, okay, this one's from Megan O'Sullivan and Jason Bordoff from Foreign Affairs, titled "Greenpeace: How the Fight Against Climate Change Can Overcome Geopolitical Discord." Mike, you're someone who's a big fan of Discord. Take this one. Go on. We only have 15 minutes.
You're reaching in the bottom of the barrel for these insults. All right. Our listeners might not have noticed, but the world seems to be getting a lot more hostile in a lot more places over the last several years. The writers of this piece make a fascinating case that we can decrease global tensions if we take a different approach than we are now. They recommend economic integration, meaning stop adding all these new subsidies and tariffs, and embrace trade with a larger pool of partners. We should note that fair trade advocates will have a strong reaction to this idea. They also emphasize making decarbonization a better deal for the developing world. And that means passing policies that ensure investments in clean energy resources in developing countries that benefit local communities. And standards could also require investor compliance with environmental and social standards. Countries could also take steps to encourage more private investments by helping manage risks in a fashion similar to the DOE's loan guarantee program. John?
Yeah, some interesting thoughts here, especially coming off our first story where we were talking about 7 Chinese solar manufacturers beating out big oil when we don't really allow those 7 manufacturers to sell directly into the U.S. I think some good points are made here that switching the world to a clean economy should be looked at more than just a project of decarbonization. Developing countries have expressed concerns over losing investment to wealthier nations because of subsidies and tariffs. All the while, they're suffering the worst effects of climate change. We know that based on the data. But there's the potential for this to be a boon for developing countries as well, allowing them to attract investment, tap into new energy sources, and use their resources to power entirely new industries. All right, Mike, our third story.
Our third story is by Rafaela Jinich from Bloomberg, titled "A Trump Win Puts $369 Billion in Clean Energy Incentives at Risk," BI says. John?
Yeah, I'm going to be quick here. And this is more a story about the fearful sentiment that is growing within the industry. But listeners to Factor This will have heard a couple of different opinions on this. Do you Trump-proof your business in clean energy, or do you just keep going as fast as we possibly can until something happens? And we need to acknowledge that clean energy grew under President Trump. It grew under President Biden, obviously, at a faster clip. These would take acts of Congress. This is not something that a second-term President Trump could completely undo with the snap of a finger, like he likely will do with offshore wind in federal lease areas. So that's my initial take here, Mike. I think this seems like a broad macro reaction from a mainstream media pub.
All right, I had another trade reporter, one much more famous than you, John Engel. Just
name
saying.
Names.
Ask me
if you're going to do that. If it's Jeff St. John, you tell me.
I keep my sources safe.
I like the Canary guys, by the way. That should be noted. They do great work.
Asked me recently if I thought the momentum of the clean energy transition was reversible or it was baked in. And yesterday we taped the latest episode of the Cleantech Leaders Roundtable Quarterly Investors Panel. And I asked our panelists that question, baked in or reversible? Consensus was that it'll be hard to achieve a full reversal. There's already too much investment that's been made in red states, and it's driving too much economic activity to kill. And I think there's an old political adage, it's much easier to give things than it is to take them away. So the consensus seemed to be tinker, sure, vandalize some of it, possible, full reversal, likely not. I'll add my own point of view. The first Trump administration saw continued growth in clean energy. And I think we should note that the Trump administration did install people who were hostile to renewables, but they proved to be the gang that couldn't shoot straight, in part because most of the professional influence peddlers didn't want to do the standard rotation into a presidential administration because this one was particularly dysfunctional and crazy. I think no matter how you plan to vote, it's hard to discern that the former president has gotten saner and more functional and more normal. So he's going to provide a stronger disincentive for more lobbyist monkey wrenchers from the ranks of the fracking lobby to come back, suffer through working in the Trump administration to do their industry's business. I'd add that Trump's affinity for protectionist policies would seem to indicate that he'll keep tariffs on clean energy imports from China. John, our fourth story.
This is one right up your alley. A $214 million loan from DOE to make chemicals from corn sugar, not petroleum. This one from CNBC. Mike, take it away with your climate tech innovation.
I'm fascinated by this story, but I will suspect it will trigger your instinct for naysaying, Mr. Engel. So I'm going to pick up the pom-poms so you can use the whoopee cushion when you go.
No.
Instead of using oil, Solugen uses enzymes and metal catalysts to convert sustainable feedstock or corn sugar into chemicals for concrete, industrial wastewater treatments, and household detergents. Its manufacturing process is a much cleaner alternative to petroleum because it leaves behind no harmful byproducts and little carbon pollution. This grant enables the company co-founders to expand operations with a factory in Minnesota, close to American manufacturers such as General Mills and 3M. They plan to develop new sustainable chemicals from sugar to make plastics and nylon without leaving harmful heavy metals or forever chemicals behind. All right, John, I'm bracing myself. Go ahead.
No, I'm getting better at this because I think I may not understand all of it, and this is involving scientists and chemicals and periodic tables. Who am I? Any way to decarbonize a hard to abate sector like this one is a major win. I'm usually the kind of guy that wants to go after the biggest slice of pie first, but we do need to make progress in other areas as well. So they're claiming that their innovation makes their products carbon negative because the main feedstock is corn, which pulls carbon out of the air as it grows. Similar claims by the ethanol industry have been widely challenged for failing to factor in the carbon cost of devoting land to corn farming. Would it really be clean tech if it means we're cutting down our forests to grow the corn that this company uses to make its products? I guess we will see. But the DOE does go through an exhaustive process to vet these companies. So I will at least give deference to Jigar Shah and his very talented team at this point. All right, Mike, our fifth story and our guest this week.
Jeff Young from Newsweek, he wrote a story, Biden links green power to good pay with clean energy wage rules. Jeff Young, first, welcome to the show. We appreciate you coming on the Romper Room for Adult Men. And you can provide some adult supervision here. We very much appreciate that. If people have not read your story, which we want them to do, what do you want them to know is the big takeaway from it?
I think this is a good example of how the Biden administration is trying to link its clean energy and climate goals to its goals for industrial policy and growing middle-class jobs and incomes. And so that seems to be the main takeaway here, that they're using some of the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, the very poorly named Inflation Reduction Act, I might add, another element of this story, to boost income for people who are working in the field.
Jeff, I really liked your headline here, too, because the way that I've thought about prevailing wage and even some of the actions with tariffs and imports from Southeast Asia and China has, in my mind, been more that President Biden has such deep conviction about both climate change and labor, and that those two things are often at odds, that to achieve everything we want to do with climate, maybe we should just import every cheap Chinese module we can get our hands on to get a bunch of solar farms out in the open spaces and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. It appears to me that the president ranks those things almost equal, climate and labor and domestic policy. Is that your sense based on this reporting, or how do you think that, how's he done with that challenge of navigating those competing missions?
I think that's a very astute observation, and we've seen that in, for example, the United Auto Workers strike that was in some ways related to the development of the transition to electric vehicles. We see it definitely in the discussion around the tariffs, as you mentioned, on clean energy products coming out of China, especially. So I put this question in a form to John Podesta, the White House climate advisor, a longtime player in this field. And as he describes it, yes, it's part of harmonizing these two goals for the administration, but it also has to do, in his opinion, with building a sustainable clean energy transition. If your clean energy transition is perceived by a large section of voters, citizens, as coming at their expense, it's not going to be politically or policy-wise sustainable. You have to get buy-in from people, and getting buy-in means putting some money in their pockets, making sure that a worker going to work for a solar facility, for example, doesn't earn about $16 an hour, which, according to the Buildings Trades Union, is what people had been making when they could be making a lot more money working for oil company X or what have you, right? So under these prevailing wage standards, presumably, the companies will have the incentive to get this 5 times bonus on their tax credits, and they're in the process be paying higher wages to their employees.
Jeff, I've always been struck by the very clean energy strands in the DNA of Bidenomics. And I wonder, do you see this move as fitting squarely within the Bidenomics framework?
Definitely. Yeah. This is, and I think there's a reason they made kind of a big deal out of what, to be honest, is kind of a mundane process of finalizing the rules. I mean, they had already announced this thing was coming a year ago. So they finalized the rules, and it's like they threw a big party. They had the Treasury Secretary on a press briefing call. They had John Podesta on a press briefing call. They had everybody they could get in there because they clearly want to draw attention to this, and they see this as part and parcel of what you were just talking about. Also, I think they realize they're not connecting with voters as much as they perhaps had hoped. Some evidence of that, I think, is in some recent survey results from the good folks at the Yale Center on Climate Communication. Very few voters, even among self-described liberal Democrats, say they have heard very much about the Inflation Reduction Act. But when those same voters that they surveyed read some neutral information about what the Inflation Reduction Act does on clean energy and climate change, their support for it goes up north of 70%. I mean, even self-described moderate Republicans are saying, heck yeah, this is great. So there's a communications problem there that they need to overcome.
Mike, I think we have proof that I've been removed from the White House press invitation list because I wasn't on those calls. I didn't get an invite. Hey, Jeff, really curious here about some of those points you were getting to with resonating with voters. I'm interested in the industry piece as well, because when I was having conversations very early on in the Inflation Reduction Act's rollout, developers and IPPs, asset owners, whoever, were telling me that they thought this was going to be the trickiest part of the whole law, the compliance, finding the workers, paying them this wage. These are still businesses and they want margin too. So they are having to pay more for labor. How's it being received on that front? And are there any challenges there for kind of the industry side of the equation who has to implement?
Well, this is a good question. I mean, I think the administration's perspective would be, it's like, hey, we're giving you 5 times bonus on your tax credits. All you have to do is meet these prevailing wage standards. And there's some language in there about registered apprenticeships, which speaks to the portion of your question about the available workforce. There is definitely going to be a shortage of electricians and other skilled workers for a lot of these jobs. And so that's part of the thinking there. To be honest, I think we're going to have to wait and see what kind of reaction we get from the industry on this. There were several questions that the administration couldn't quite field yet about whether they're seeing an increase in applications for these tax credits from industry just yet. It's possible that, even though they knew this was coming, they being folks in industry, they were awaiting the certainty of actually seeing the thing, with the ink dry, finalized before they move ahead with the contracts and whatnot. So I guess my short answer to your question is TBD.
John, we're just about out of time. We need to go to our Cleantecher of the Week.
This week's Cleantecher of the Week is the founder of energy transition investment platform Megawatt-X, Laurent Segalen. Laurent has been trading and investing billions of euros in clean energy for more than 2 decades, so congratulations to Laurent.
I want to give a shout out to our terrific producer, Brian Mendez, and Claire Quirin and Alex Peterson for helping us gather these stories.
Yeah, and a big thank you to Jeff Young for joining us on this episode of This Week in Clean Tech. Please subscribe, give us feedback, and share your story recommendations. We will see you all next time.
See you, John Engel, for episode 41.